On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy.
So what's in today's show, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this episode we go back to Kent to see once again our old friend Neil Nixon, who's talking about why people need mysteries. And then we go to Canada for the second half of CFZ Canada's Dave Scott's interview with Robyn Moonshadow about Bigfoot. Enjoy.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and this is, if I can get it the right way around, Archie, the CFZ dog, who thinks that he is the most important person here. And you never know, you might be right. This episode, we're going to bring you something rather special. It's the second half of our interview with Neil Nixon about why do people need mysteries. And he gives a pretty good account of the theory that the human race, the human species, would not be who we are if it wasn't for mysteries. One of the things that has always mildly surprised me is how few people in the Fortean community are overtly religious.
Yeah, that's a good question, John. A good observation. You're right. In a broad sense, probably it's about looking for answers and meaning. So you would find people within that, I think, who aren't religious in an accepted sense, but have religious behavior. And I'm not just, again, we could swap anecdotes, but there's loads. I don't know about cryptozoology so much, but there's loads written more recently in ufology. There's loads written about the way that there are some UFO religions, and at the same time there are other people in the business who behave in a religious way but probably don't see it as religious. In fact, a story I sometimes tell on the longer UFO talks, it's occasionally I've had moments in UFO investigation where something I never expected to happen was probably one of the most useful things that ever could. And I was not far from you, 21 years ago, maybe. You're aware of the significance of Holdstone Down in Devon to UFOs, right?
Yeah.
Or not?
Yeah,
right. So the master Etherious landed there, and this is where George King had his experience and stuff. And long story short, but I was writing a UFO Pocket Essential years ago, and this is discussed in one of the more recent UFO books as well. And I wanted to get something on the Etherious Society, who are this religious group that believe, it's a UFO-based religion, but it is fundamentally a religion.
Yeah, they aren't they the ones who climb hills and mountains and look to charge up spiritual batteries?
The very thing, yeah, the prayer power batteries, absolutely, and they use prayer energy, and they've reverently released this energy at different points and calmed certain trouble spots in the world. In fact, if they're true to form, they may well be looking at doing that at the moment, because if nothing else is going to help in Gaza, they probably think they can. And long story short, again, but they're a really nice bunch, and they're so user friendly, and they've been derided amongst the UFO community because for years, and I think wrongly, it was suspected that the security forces, i.e. them, artificially stoked the numbers of the Etherious Society, which meant that the Etherious Society were a go-to for the pre-internet, were a go-to for the British press for comments. And the whole belief in ufology, the sort of more serious ufologists, was that the point of doing this was to continue to bring the subject into disrepute. But I rang them up, and rather than just answer my questions, they invited me along to this chanting session, and I went, and it was wonderful. I spent 2 hours chanting Buddhist mantras on top of Holdstone Down, and you mildly hyperventilate. It's you come off there feeling pleasantly stoned, and it's all thoroughly legal and everything. And but I had a conversation on the way down with a couple of them, and one of them in particular, one guy I was talking to in particular, had a very demanding professional job. I better not say what he did, because he'd probably be quite easy to identify on the back of that. But the truth of the matter is, it just occurred to me, if I succeeded in persuading him that I didn't believe his cosmology, I've done him no favours at all. I couldn't offer him anything other than skepticism about what he was doing, and yet this was about as meaningful as his life got when he was with his fellow Etherians. And it was an interesting thing, because on that afternoon, there were about 3 of us that were off to one side, who were there for various reasons other than being full-blown Etherians. And they were thoroughly happy that we joined in. And as long as we chanted, I mean, you've got to behave like it matters. But we were so much the minority. It was a very good experience, and it's something that stuck with me, because there's absolutely no doubt that some of the cosmology to do with UFOs and the sort of 50s, particularly ufology, that works very well with the Etherians, it clearly gives deep meaning to the lives of these people. And you would be an idiot to interfere with that. And at the same time, like I said earlier, I really struggled with what they believe. I couldn't honestly just give myself over to that, because have you ever read the Flying Sorcerers, the kind of social history of ufology by Andy Roberts and Dave Clark?
Yeah.
So I rang Dave about this years ago when I was doing something else in terms of an article, because there's a wonderful story in there, and obviously he couldn't give me any contacts to check this out. The people involved are dead now, but in the 90s there was a guy that spoke to them that claimed to have been in the room in the 1950s at, I think it was I can't remember what the meeting was, but anyway, the gist of it was there was a meeting in London in the 1950s. George King turned up absolutely hammered drunk. This is the guy that founded the Etherious Society, made a complete nuisance of himself and promptly fell asleep. It might have been a communist meeting, actually. And then at the end of it, roused himself at the end of the meeting. The apocryphal story is that he said to anybody who would listen, i.e. just out loud, "How do I make £1 million?" And somebody said to him, "Start your own religion, mate." Apparently, now, obviously, Dave Clark had heard this as a second-hand story. If there are any eyewitnesses to that happening, if that did happen and there were eyewitnesses, this would be the mid-50s. The chances of any of them still being alive aren't that great. And it's a shame, because it's that may well put that particular UFO religion in a totally different light.
I've heard that story, or a version of that story, about Robert Heinlein and what the hell's his name? And L. Ron Hubbard.
Quite possibly, and it's easy to be cynical, and you can never tie these things down. And it's one of the reasons I'm unsure about that story is that it's such an easy way to dismiss what is very meaningful to a lot of other people. And it's interesting that I'm less and less cynical about people who find religious meaning linked to the paranormal, but I struggle to buy the belief systems. But recently, you might have heard there was a podcast series called The Interruption at the end of last year, and the guy who presented it was a guy called Tommy Trelawney, who has a huge following on social media, and he was looking at the interruption, the 6 and a bit minutes, when apparently aliens broke into the ITN news on a November night in 1977. And I don't know if you're aware of this. It happened in Hampshire. So on the one hand, you've got Gordon Honeycomb reading the news, and the picture stays the same, but the audio for that particular part of the news broadcast was an alien, variously the name's given as Virilon, and it's, when you look at it online, that's the name that's given, but obviously there was no written text supplied, and apparently aliens just intruded into it, and Tommy Trelawney's entire podcast series was trying to get to the bottom of how that had happened and who these people were. Yeah. And at one point in one episode, he became very suspicious that the Etherious Society were behind it, almost like a publicity stunt. And he went to find them. And I didn't realize this, but Richard Lawrence, who's been the long-serving head of the Etherious Society in Britain, obviously George King moved to America, didn't he? And he interviewed Richard Lawrence and pretty much accused him of being the guy that did that broke into the broadcast. And actually, I felt for Richard Lawrence. I hadn't realized this, but Tommy Trelawney pointed out that Richard Lawrence had trained as an actor, so he suspected him for that reason. And it clearly wasn't him. I mean, in fact, he names the guy at the end of it. It was a guy called Bob Tomolsky, who was actually the guy that did it. But I actually felt for Richard Lawrence in that moment. I thought, well, it's, people like him get ridiculed unfairly, I think. I mean, I don't, the more I've had dealings with people like that, the more I'm aware of their sincerity, regardless of whether I can literally believe what they're saying or not.
I agree with you totally, because my view is that even if I don't believe, if I'm talking to somebody, meeting them, interviewing, whatever, my view is even if I think they're talking codswallop, you've got to be polite and kind and respectful.
Well, I've had moments where the least likely things that have happened in sort of paranormal investigation have actually turned out to be quite useful. And like I say, that particular moment dealing with the Etherians about 21 years ago, I was so conscious that they'd got a level of meaning and purpose to their lives that I couldn't have offered them that afternoon if I changed their minds. And that in itself is important, because for a lot of the rest of us, I think sometimes the fascination with the biggest mysteries of life, like the paranormal, is very much, it becomes a kind of secular religious thing. And I'm also conscious that in doing that much as I'm kind of unconvinced by some of the kind of UFO religions and whatever, but just to do with the people who founded them, really, and how easy it is. I mean, the Raelians are an infamous lot, And,
I wondered when we get to them.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I don't know. Just a point. Something I was writing ages ago. I don't think I used this fact, but because these days the internet will throw up all sorts of archaic details that at the time were not widely available to the public. So it's widely understood that the Raelians were founded by Claude Virilon, who was previously a racing driver. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. You can Google his history as a racing driver. Well, it's not particularly spectacular. I mean, as in, if the Raelians had been founded by Claude Virilon's age, if the Raelians had been founded by Niki Lauda, it would have been a different story, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think I can't remember now. I think like his highest placing in anything was 11th, and this was not a particularly spectacular race. So it's easy to be cynical, isn't it? I mean, obviously in that case, he was interested in spectacular jobs before he became the head of his own religion, at which point he couldn't have got more spectacular, really. He's a worldwide figure revered by his followers, and the rest of us have heard of him. Yeah.
You're not going to guess where I met the Raelians first. It's perfectly logical.
You met, what, a conference or something? I don't know.
No, it was a gong concert.
Oh, really?
Which makes perfect fucking sense.
Oh, yeah. I could see, I could see a certain cosmic consciousness would go with that. In fact, I think it's the night I'm seeing focus, I saw that there was a triple header which included, I can't remember who the third one is, but Gong and Osric Tentacles were on the same bill. It's like, well, that'll be a night, wouldn't it? That's up in London.
I'm not as keen on the new Gong as I think Gong without David Allen is very difficult.
I suppose, yeah. But on the other hand, I'm quite prepared to. I mean, one or two of those bands when they're on form. I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. I saw Hawkwind at the Albert Hall not long ago, and given that it was a train strike night, and my mate had cried off with COVID, so it was an effort to even get there. But there's no way I was going to miss it. And I was trying to explain to somebody why I bothered that hard, and it was like, well, you don't really go and see Hawkwind; you kind of experience them.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And you just, and it's not a gig so much. It's just you just go somewhere else for the best part of an hour and a bit, and it's why not? And again, there's I'm not saying there's a religion based around that, but it's that whole thing about the need to. Theologians would call it the need for transcendence, wouldn't they? To have those experiences which are. I bang on sometimes about William James, who kind of codified all of this. That I think the Varieties of Religious Experiences book is about 1902. So to be fair, he's well ahead of the game. If what we're talking about now, but he codified a mystic experience that knowledge is past and that it's transcendent and that you don't go looking for it and it's fleeting. And the best of all the uncanny experiences can give us that, sometimes in ways that we don't expect.
And I find the effects on the witnesses, or to use that horrible American word, the experiences, I find the effects on the people who've experienced it are equally as interesting, if not more interesting, than the descriptions of the incident itself.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a thing about 30 odd years ago. It was a big thing in British ufology that the John Spencer was arguing for a thing called witness-driven investigation, which was about starting from those experiences and working out. I have a suspicion we might end up going back to that because, just a guess, in my particular area of ufology, what's happening at the moment is we've got all these spectacular claims and we've got these congressional hearings, but behind that, it's in danger of collapse, really. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's somebody who's involved in the field in the United States, a guy called Cal Korff, and I don't know how far he's going to get with it.
I know Cal.
Yeah, right, okay. But so you're aware then that one thing he's doing at the moment, he's using the courts in America effectively to charge certain key figures in ufology with consumer fraud for masquerading as something they're not. And it's made quite a few, it's gathered a lot of interest over here in the UK, largely because one of the people who's caught up in this is Nick Pope. And seriously, yeah, I mean, as in, you didn't know this? Huh?
No, I do.
No, so well, this is the gist of it. There was an article in the Washington Herald this year, and I've swapped some messages with Cal about this. It's not just Nick Pope, but
oh, do tell. Who else is he?
Well, the other people is after the obvious ones, really. Robert Bigelow's hangers-on, as in the gist in those cases is that they've, as a result of political influence, they've caused over $20 million of US taxpayers' money to be spent in UFO investigation. And if you looked at it in a truly cynical way, I mean, again, I mentioned Skeptoid here, that Brian Dunning of Skeptoid devoted a couple of episodes to this, where he was looking at, Bigelow Aerospace and the investigation of advanced investigation into aerial threats or whatever that Robert Bigelow set up. And effectively, Cal Korff has got these people in his sights as well. But in a curious way, Nick Pope might be the easier test case. Because Nick Pope for years has been billed on various UFO conferences and stuff as the guy that ran the UFO desk for the Ministry of Defense. And yet there are things like the Nick Pope Watch website and various other things on social media that, and, you know, ufologists like Phil Mantle, who've been involved in this for years, and therefore when they were doing investigations in the 90s were swapping correspondence with Nick Pope, which made it blatantly clear that, number one, the MOD didn't have a UFO desk. It had an area that dealt with investigation of reports and complaints about low flying and whatever, which by default was a kind of UFO desk, because, you know, they would get all sorts of random complaints and inquiries in, and they had to investigate what it was. But these people never actually left the office. You know, when there was investigation to be done, they would subcontract that. I mean, I can't remember the gist of this now, but I know that one of the more interesting cases during that period was that there was some radar trace, you know, kind of hard to explain radar trace turned up. I think it was over Lincolnshire, and they ended up proving that it was the spire of the is it cathedral at Boston Spa, but it's like it's the tallest building in a very flat area, and, you know, radar occasionally under certain conditions picked it up. But so Nick Pope is mentioned in that Washington Herald article, and you know, Cal Korff has got it in for him, and he's been, the last I heard, he was being charged with consumer fraud. Effectively, I suppose the gist of it is that the argument there is that anybody who consistently pretends to be something he wasn't and is therefore charging attendees at conferences and stuff on that basis. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, I don't think you'd get away with it in the UK. I think American consumer fraud laws are probably, America's a more litigious society anyway. But what I was saying is, I think ufology might default to the things we were talking before, because I have a hunch that there will come a point when these congressional hearings and all the other claims, the sort of spectacular stuff, unless it delivers something spectacular itself very quickly, it's going to become a busted flush. And then we probably end up going back to that kind of witness-driven thing that you mentioned before, because what you can never take away from most of the paranormal subjects is the sincerity of the witnesses and their own first-hand experiences. Yeah, what drives it and what's driven it all the years I've been involved is not the people who write books or produce documentaries. We're totally reliant on reports, and most of the reports, if you look at the witnesses and the people who turn up in books and documentaries, these are not people who went looking for the experiences they had, and in a lot of cases they've changed their lives have changed considerably. I mean, if you've seen one of the better documentaries in ufology of late, there's a 4-part series on Netflix called Encounters, and in the third edition of that, the third episode of that, there's a guy called Matthew Roberts who was involved he worked for the Navy. Effectively, he was serving in the American Navy, and he wasn't in the front line of this, but he saw as a result of his job, like basically monitoring what was going on and you know, just sort of keeping tabs on like radar and whatever that was being used by the American Navy. He saw some of the Pentagon videos and similar, yeah. And he turns up in this episode, and effectively he says that this had such a profound effect on him that despite the fact that he only had about 4 years of his Navy career left, he packed it all up. So he walked away from a lifetime's pension and a lifetime's healthcare, which is no easy thing to do in the United States, just because he wanted to find answers. Now, yes, people like him who've always been the bedrock of paranormal, of all the kind of paranormal investigations that go on, you know, people who are profoundly changed to the point.
And like I said, a lot of times the ones in the States don't care if you find their tracks. They're cautious. And I have found more tracks in the States than I have up here in Ontario, Canada. And one of my locations, I have 3, or what I would call a family unit. So I have a male, a female, and a juvenile. Now, I haven't found them this year, but there's been a lot of people going in this area hunting. I can't do anything about it, unfortunately. I have permission to go on the property, but it's not my property. So, and it is difficult up here because everything is so compressed to get tracks. But we have to try when we can get them. So this is the female, and I've got a bit of an outline here for you. So this is the female, and I have the marker here. Sorry, it isn't a bit better, but like I said, they compress, and it's hard to get tracks sometimes. And I got this one, 2021. And this one broke on me, but I do have the bottom. And this would be the male. And this one is the same size as the one I found in Virginia this year. So that would be the male. I put them in my backpack and it broke. And this is a juvenile that I found in 2019. Sometimes when you put them in your backpack and they're not 100% hard yet, they'll break. And it doesn't matter how much you wrap them or bubble wrap them, they'll go.
Yep.
So, yeah. And I've gotten better about it because with the water mixture, I don't add quite as much water, so then they'll harden faster.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be a bit more durable. But this is a juvenile. And, well, how do I know it's not a person or a proto-pygmy? Well, the toes at the top. A real Bigfoot track, and then there's a bit of variation with them, but the toes should be all around the same size. I mean, you see it in the big ones. And there's no difference with the juveniles. And I got this one in 2019, and I can assume it would be the same one. And this is a 6-inch, and the next time that I saw it, it was an 8-inch.
So it's growing.
Yeah. You can't be 100% sure it's the same one, but if you're constantly seeing the same 3 all the time, you can pretty much, gather that it's probably the same 3. So they were the 3. And with the one in the Virginia, yeah, to me, they act a bit odd. Like I said, they're a bit more bolder in this location. He claims that they come and they steal the corn that he puts out for the deer. Well, it's free food. Of course they're going to do that.
Come get it. Yeah.
Yep. And he's come home a few times and the shed door has been open and the corn food and something else he stores in the shed was eaten. But yeah, it's free food.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it's free food. They're going to eat it. Now, another place that I actually like going to is Jawari National Forest, again in the States. It has a feel all of its own. And I'm always finding some kind of track there. Something that interesting that happened was, when was this? 2019, 2020. So it was just before everybody went on COVID lockdown up here. I found this huge print of a canine. And it was big, and I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, this is a gray wolf. There's no gray wolves in Jawari. And my friend said, oh, it's probably a red wolf. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know there's no gray wolves here, but this is a gray wolf print. But there's no gray wolves here. Well, it could be a red wolf, could be an extra large red wolf. So it did kind of bother me because very rarely am I wrong about tracks. But I let it go because, that made no sense. If it's a big red wolf, it's a big red wolf. And so I got home, and about a week later, a friend of mine sent me an article that somebody's gray wolf had gotten loose in that area. I was like, I knew it. Out of place animal. I knew it was a gray wolf. And we do have them up here, just not in my area. And although recently, like first year of COVID, I was speaking to the local veterinarian about it, and a friend of hers had seen 3 gray wolves in our general area. And we do have a bit of a coyote problem here. So gray wolves or timber wolves will drive coyotes out. So that would be nice, because wolves will control their own populations like big cats do. So that would be nice as well. On my last trip this year, it was a very long drive. So we started in North Carolina and moved down through Gettysburg into Pennsylvania and down into Allegheny National Forest. Beautiful area. They have an old legend there about apple witches, where, well, to me, they're chimp-like. And even the descriptions of the appearances are chimps. Now, we don't have any chimps in North America. Yep. So how would they get here? But these are the descriptions. So I go to this area to find it. Now, unfortunately, we didn't find anything on this trip. Not even a track of any interest of any kind, which was kind of disappointing. And second last day, we go to a place called Rimrock. And it's a straight drop off in a rocky area. Very nice. I didn't get close to the edge, of course not. It's just
if you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page, and check out our Patreon.
And there's the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little house, will tell you. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you won't be told when the next episode's gonna be.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for this episode. And so, before Archie and I say goodbye, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has put this episode together. And I particularly want to say hi and thank you to my producer Louis, except he's still gallivanting around the United States, probably wearing a Ronald Reagan mask by now. Yes, Archie, it's pretty appalling, I think. You can probably hear Archie disapproving and doing a bit of grumbling here. But I would like to say thank you to my guests this week, who've been Dave Scott, Robyn Moonshadow and Neil Nixon. I'm going to be back on Wednesday with Richard Muirhead, and we're going to be talking about the latest issue of his magazine, Flying Snake. And I will be back next... what's the day? Saturday. Next Saturday I'll be back. And I'm going to be going down to the crossroads, just like Robert Johnson, to see if I can find inspiration for how to make that show work. So you're not going to want to miss that, because I believe we have Robert Johnson himself here in the studio. So, assuming that you're all going to be there watching, and assuming I've not been hit by lightning or something, and I will be there in the controller's chair. Okay, it's this chair really, but it makes me believe that I'm the controller and I'm doing the live chat and the everything else I do on a Saturday afternoon. Are you listening, McQuinnan? Oi, McQuinnan, are you listening? Archie and I are talking to you, because I want to know whether, if you're there on Saturday afternoon, whether, I can't do it with that hand, whether I'll be seeing you.